The Clone Wars stand as one of the most devastating conflicts in galactic history. Orchestrated by Darth Sidious, this war was not only a contest of military might but also a psychological and spiritual battleground aimed at destroying the Jedi Order. Despite their centuries-long role as peacekeepers and guardians of justice, the Jedi made critical errors during this period that directly contributed to their downfall. These mistakes, rooted in strategic miscalculations, rigid adherence to dogma, and a failure to adapt, ensured that the Sith's grand plan would come to fruition. One of the Jedi's gravest errors was their willingness to assume the role of generals in the war. Traditionally, the Jedi had served as mediators and defenders, striving to resolve conflicts without resorting to violence. However, the Clone Wars thrust them into a role that fundamentally contradicted their core principles. By becoming military leaders, they abandoned their identity as peacekeepers and allowed themselves to be perceived as warriors. This shift not only compromised their moral standing but also played into the Sith's narrative, which sought to paint the Jedi as power-hungry enforcers of the Republic. The decision to lead the clone army was another significant misstep. The clones, commissioned under suspicious circumstances by Jedi Master Sifo Dyas and created by the Kaminoans, were accepted with minimal scrutiny. While the Jedi harbored some initial doubts about the army's origins, they ultimately placed their trust in it, believing it to be a necessary tool to combat the Separatists. This acceptance proved disastrous, as the clones were embedded with inhibitor chips designed to execute Order 66, a contingency that would lead to the near extermination of the Jedi. The fact that the Jedi did not investigate the army's origins thoroughly underscores their complacency and over-reliance on their traditional authority. Another critical failure was their inability to navigate the shifting political landscape of the Republic. The Jedi had historically aligned themselves with the Republic, acting as its protectors. However, during the Clone Wars, the Republic under Chancellor Palpatine became increasingly authoritarian and corrupt. Rather than distancing themselves from this regime, the Jedi became deeply entangled in its politics, often acting as instruments of its will. This association alienated many citizens of the galaxy, who began to view the Jedi as complicit in the Republic's failings. By prioritizing their loyalty to the Republic over their broader mission to uphold peace and justice, the Jedi further isolated themselves. This detachment was most apparent in their dealings with the common people. Operating primarily from their temple on Coruscant, the Jedi were physically and symbolically removed from the lives of those they were meant to protect. While they focused on high-level strategy and political maneuvering, they failed to address the growing discontent and suffering in the galaxy's outer systems. This detachment fostered resentment, which the Sith exploited to turn public opinion against the Jedi. The Jedi's inability to connect with the galaxy's populace made it easier for Palpatine to frame them as traitors when the time came to enact his final plan. Perhaps the most pivotal mistake the Jedi made was their mishandling of Anakin Skywalker. As the Chosen One, prophesied to bring balance to the Force, Anakin represented both the Jedi's greatest hope and their greatest vulnerability. From the outset, Anakin struggled with the Jedi Code, particularly its strict prohibitions on attachment. His deep bond with his mother, and later with Padme Amidala, conflicted with the Jedi's expectation of emotional detachment. Instead of addressing Anakin's struggles with understanding and guidance, the Jedi imposed their rigid dogma upon him, exacerbating his sense of isolation. The Jedi Council's mistrust of Anakin only deepened this rift. Despite his remarkable skills and contributions to the war effort, they withheld their full confidence from him, culminating in their decision to deny him the rank of Master even after appointing him to the Council. This move was not only a blow to Anakin's pride, but also a clear signal that the Jedi did not fully trust him. Their decision to task him with spying on Palpatine further strained their relationship, placing Anakin in an untenable position. Torn between his loyalty to the Jedi and his personal connection to the Chancellor, Anakin found himself increasingly drawn to Palpatine's manipulations. The Jedi's failure to recognize Palpatine as Darth Sidious was arguably their most consequential error. Despite numerous warning signs, including Palpatine's growing influence and his direct involvement in the war's strategies, the Jedi underestimated the Sith's ability to operate in plain sight. They believed that their mastery of the Force and their centuries of experience made them impervious to such deception. This overconfidence blinded them to the reality of the Sith's resurgence, and allowed Palpatine to orchestrate the war's progression without interference. Even when the Jedi finally acted against Palpatine, their approach was flawed. Mace Windu's decision to confront the Chancellor directly, while bold, lacked the necessary political and strategic foresight. By attempting to arrest Palpatine without securing broader support or preparing for the fallout, Windu played directly into Sidious's hands. The confrontation not only resulted in Windu's death, but also provided Palpatine with the pretext to declare the Jedi enemies of the Republic, solidifying his power and paving the way for the Galactic Empire. The Jedi's rigid interpretation of their code was another critical factor in their downfall. Their prohibition of attachment, while intended to prevent individuals from falling to the dark side, often led to emotional repression and disconnection. This rigidity alienated not only Anakin but also other members of the Order, such as Ahsoka Tano. Ahsoka's departure from the Order, after being falsely accused and feeling betrayed by the Council, highlighted the Jedi's inability to balance their principles with compassion and flexibility. Her loss deprived the Jedi of a valuable ally and underscored their failure to adapt to the needs of their members. The Jedi's strategic approach to the Clone Wars also revealed their limitations. While they were skilled warriors and tacticians, they approached the conflict as a conventional war, focusing on military victories and territorial control. However, the Clone Wars were fundamentally a war of attrition and manipulation, designed by the Sith to exhaust both the Republic and the Jedi. The Jedi's focus on short-term victories blinded them to the long-term consequences of their actions. Every battle won on the front lines brought them closer to defeat, as it further entrenched the Republic in chaos and strengthened Palpatine's grip on power. Their failure to anticipate Order 66 was a culmination of these strategic blind spots. Despite their suspicions about the clones and the overarching war, they did not adequately prepare for the possibility of betrayal. When the order was finally executed, the Jedi were caught entirely off guard. Their lack of contingency planning and over-reliance on their supposed moral and strategic superiority left them vulnerable, resulting in the near-complete destruction of their order. In retrospect, the Jedi's downfall was not merely the result of external manipulation, but also a reflection of their internal weaknesses. Their inability to adapt, their detachment from the galaxy's realities, and their overconfidence in their role and abilities all contributed to their demise. The Sith's rise was facilitated by these flaws, turning the Jedi's own strengths, such as their commitment to the Republic and their reliance on the Force, into liabilities. The tragedy of the Clone Wars lies not only in the devastation it wrought upon the galaxy, but also in the potential that was lost with the Jedi's fall. The Jedi Order, despite its flaws, was a force for good and a symbol of hope. Their mistakes serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of complacency, rigidity, and the failure to adapt to changing circumstances. Yet, even in their darkest moments, the Jedi planted the seeds of eventual redemption. Their survivors, such as Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi, carried the lessons of their failure forward, ensuring that the Jedi would rise again, tempered by the knowledge of their past. The aftermath of the Clone Wars cemented the Jedi's legacy as both a beacon of hope and a cautionary tale of how even the most venerable institutions can fall. While their mistakes were numerous and catastrophic, the Jedi's downfall was not inevitable. It was the result of a series of interconnected missteps that the Sith capitalized on with devastating precision. These missteps, however, hold lessons that resonate beyond their immediate context, offering insights into the nature of power, leadership, and the challenges of maintaining principles in times of crisis. One of the most enduring aspects of the Jedi's failure was their reliance on a rigid hierarchical structure. The Jedi Council operated as the supreme authority within the Order, and while this structure provided stability, it also stifled dissent and innovation. Younger Jedi, like Anakin Skywalker, often found their perspectives dismissed or undervalued, which created an environment where critical voices were either silenced or forced into rebellion. The Council's decision-making process, though deliberative, was slow and often reactive, leaving the Jedi ill-prepared to respond to the fast-moving and deceptive strategies of the Sith. Moreover, the Jedi's overemphasis on detachment and suppression of emotions left many of their members vulnerable to internal conflict. The belief that attachment led to the dark side was a cornerstone of Jedi philosophy, but it failed to account for the complexity of human emotion. This doctrine did not teach Jedi to navigate their emotions constructively, but rather to avoid them altogether. For someone like Anakin, whose life was defined by intense personal bonds, this approach was both impractical and damaging. The Jedi's failure to provide a framework for understanding and managing attachment left Anakin susceptible to Palpatine's manipulations, as the Sith Lord offered him what the Jedi could not: validation of his emotions and the promise of control over his fears. The Jedi's approach to prophecy was another area of significant weakness. The prophecy of the Chosen One was a guiding light for the Order, but their interpretation of it was both narrow and self-serving. They assumed that balance in the Force would align with their vision of a galaxy dominated by the light side. This assumption blinded them to alternative interpretations and made them complacent, as they believed that the fulfillment of the prophecy would naturally coincide with their victory over the Sith. In reality, Anakin's role as the Chosen One did bring balance, but not in the way the Jedi anticipated. His actions, first as Darth Vader and later in his redemption, reshaped the galaxy's understanding of the Force and ultimately led to the downfall of both the Jedi Order and the Sith regime, albeit temporarily. The Jedi's inability to recognize and adapt to the Sith's evolving tactics further highlighted their strategic limitations. Sidious did not wage a conventional war, he waged a psychological and ideological campaign, exploiting the weaknesses of both the Republic and the Jedi. The Jedi, bound by their traditional methods and perspectives, failed to anticipate the Sith's willingness to manipulate the structures of power from within. They underestimated the Sith's patience and the extent of their infiltration. This was evident in their handling of Palpatine. Despite his accumulating power and his central role in the war, the Jedi were slow to act against him, fearing political repercussions and a loss of public support. Even when the Jedi finally decided to confront Palpatine, their actions were poorly coordinated and politically naive. Mace Windu's attempt to arrest or eliminate the Chancellor lacked the broader strategic planning necessary to counter the inevitable backlash. The Jedi acted in isolation, without securing the support of key political figures or preparing the Senate for the revelation of Palpatine's true identity. This failure not only led to Windu's death, but also allowed Palpatine to frame the Jedi as traitors, consolidating his power and rebranding the Republic as the Galactic Empire. The Jedi's lack of engagement with the broader galaxy further contributed to their isolation. While they were embroiled in the Clone Wars, they neglected the need to maintain and build alliances with various factions and communities. Their focus on the war effort came at the expense of their diplomatic mission, which had traditionally been a cornerstone of their influence. As a result, when the Sith moved against them, the Jedi found themselves without a broad base of support. Many of the galaxy's inhabitants, particularly those in the Outer Rim, saw the Jedi as distant and aloof figures whose interests aligned more with the Republic's bureaucracy than with the needs of ordinary citizens. This perception was exacerbated by the Jedi's treatment of the clone troopers. While the clones served the Jedi loyally, they were often seen as expendable assets rather than individuals with their own identities and agency. The Jedi's failure to foster a deeper connection with their clone allies made it easier for the clones to turn against them when Order 66 was enacted. Had the Jedi built stronger, more personal relationships with the clones, they might have been able to sow doubt or resistance among them when the time came. Another overlooked but critical failure was the Jedi's inability to adapt their teachings to the realities of the galaxy. For centuries, the Jedi Order had adhered to a set of principles that were developed in a different era. These principles, while noble, were not revisited or questioned as the galaxy changed. The Jedi viewed their traditions as immutable truths, which led to a rigidity that made them ill-suited to face the unprecedented challenges of the Clone Wars. Instead of evolving, the Jedi clung to their dogma, believing that their established ways would be sufficient to navigate any crisis. The Sith, on the other hand, thrived on adaptation and change. They understood the value of patience, deception, and the exploitation of systemic weaknesses. By the time the Jedi recognized the extent of the Sith's influence, it was too late to counteract it effectively. Their response to the growing threat was fragmented and inconsistent, often driven by immediate crises rather than a comprehensive strategy. Despite their failures, the Jedi's legacy is not solely defined by their mistakes. In their final moments, many Jedi demonstrated extraordinary courage and resilience. Figures like Yoda, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Ahsoka Tano survived the Purge and went on to play pivotal roles in shaping the galaxy's future. They carried with them the hard-earned lessons of the Clone Wars, understanding that the Jedi Order needed to change if it were to rise again. The fall of the Jedi also set the stage for a new understanding of the Force. Luke Skywalker, influenced by both the successes and failures of the past, would later attempt to rebuild the Jedi Order with a more nuanced approach to emotion, attachment, and power. However, the shadow of the Clone Wars and the mistakes of the Jedi Council continued to loom over the galaxy, reminding future generations of the high stakes involved in wielding the Force. Ultimately, the story of the Jedi during the Clone Wars is one of tragedy and potential. Their fall was a culmination of their hubris, their failure to adapt, and their underestimation of the Sith. Yet, within that fall lies a profound lesson: the importance of humility, the need for introspection, and the value of evolving in the face of change. The Jedi Order, though nearly destroyed, laid the groundwork for a new generation of Jedi who would strive to learn from the past and forge a path toward a more balanced future.